Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud for over 12 years, and throughout that time, he had developed a profound appreciation for the diverse range of families who appeared on his stage. He had welcomed doctors and teachers, farmers and engineers, artists and entrepreneurs. Each family brought their own story, their own struggles, and their own dreams. However, he held a special respect for working-class families who had overcome significant obstacles to participate in the show. These were families who had taken time off from hourly wage jobs, families who had saved for months to afford the trip to the studio, families for whom the potential prize money represented genuine life-changing opportunity rather than mere entertainment. What transpired on that winter afternoon in January 2025 would test Steve's commitment to honoring the dignity of all contestants regardless of their socioeconomic background, and it would result in one of the most powerful moments in game show history. Before examining this remarkable incident in detail, if you value content that celebrates the dignity of honest work and confronts prejudice when it appears, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share stories that highlight important social issues and demonstrate the power of standing up for what is right even when doing so requires courage and carries professional risk. The Rodriguez family from Sacramento, California stood on one side of the stage, facing the Hammond family from Greenwich, Connecticut. The contrast between the two families was immediately apparent not only in their geographic origins, but in virtually every visible aspect of their presentation. The Rodriguez family consisted of Maria Rodriguez, a 52-year-old woman who worked as a head janitor at a large corporate office building, her husband Carlos, who worked alongside her on the night cleaning crew, their 3 adult children who held various working-class positions, and Maria's mother who helped care for the family's children while Maria and Carlos worked their overnight shifts. They wore their best clothing for the television appearance, outfits that had clearly been selected with great care even if they lacked the polish and expense of designer labels. The Hammond family presented an entirely different image. Richard Hammond was a 48-year-old investment banker whose custom-tailored suit probably cost more than the Rodriguez family's monthly rent. His wife Patricia wore jewelry that sparkled under the studio lights with unmistakable authenticity. Their adult children carried themselves with the particular confidence that comes from private school education and trust fund security. They had arrived at the studio in a chauffeured vehicle and had made certain that everyone on the production staff was aware of their family's prominence in Connecticut's social circles. From the moment both families appeared on stage, the production crew sensed that the dynamic between them might prove challenging, though no one anticipated just how dramatically the situation would deteriorate. The game began with standard opening pleasantries. Steve introduced both families and engaged in the brief personal conversations that helped audiences connect with the contestants. When speaking with the Rodriguez family, Maria explained with evident pride that she had worked as a janitor for 23 years, that she had started as a basic cleaning crew member, and had worked her way up to a supervisory position managing a team of 15 people. She spoke about the importance of taking pride in one's work regardless of the nature of that work, and about teaching her children that honest labor deserved respect. Steve responded with genuine warmth, praising Maria's work ethic and her obvious dedication to both her job and her family. When Steve turned to introduce the Hammond family, Richard immediately established a different tone. He spoke at length about his career accomplishments, the exclusive clubs he belonged to, and the prestigious boarding schools his children had attended. He made several comments that seemed designed to emphasize the social and economic distance between his family and the Rodriguez family, though he framed these observations as simple statements of fact rather than deliberate insults. Steve maintained his professional demeanor, but his expression suggested he had registered the underlying condescension in Richard's presentation. The first few rounds of the game proceeded normally from a mechanical standpoint. Questions were asked, answers were given, and points accumulated on the board. However, Richard's behavior throughout these early rounds established a pattern that grew increasingly difficult to ignore. Whenever the Rodriguez family provided an answer that appeared on the board, Richard would make subtle dismissive gestures, shaking his head or smirking in a way that suggested he found their success surprising or undeserved. When his own family scored points, he would glance toward the Rodriguez family as though expecting acknowledgement of the Hammond family's superiority. His children seemed uncomfortable with their father's behavior, exchanging worried glances with each other, but they remained silent and did not intervene. The situation escalated dramatically during a round where the question asked contestants to name something people do to save money. Carlos Rodriguez stepped forward and answered that people clean their own homes instead of hiring cleaning services. It was a perfectly reasonable response that reflected his own life experience and expertise. Before Steve could turn to reveal whether the answer appeared on the board, Richard Hammond made a comment that would transform the entire trajectory of the episode. Speaking loudly enough for the microphones to clearly capture his words, Richard announced that of course the Janitor family would think of cleaning as a money-saving measure, since that was the only contribution they could make to society. He added that some people saved money by earning it through professional careers rather than by performing menial labor that anyone could do. The studio fell into shocked silence. The audience, the production crew, and the opposing family all seemed frozen by the blatant disrespect and class-based contempt that Richard had just expressed so openly. Maria Rodriguez's face showed the unmistakable pain of someone whose dignity had been attacked publicly. Her children moved closer to her protectively, their expressions mixing hurt and anger. Carlos stood at the podium looking as though he had been physically struck, unable to immediately process what had just occurred. Steve Harvey's reaction was immediate and visceral. His usual warm expression vanished completely, replaced by a look of pure fury that anyone who knew him would recognize as extremely dangerous. Steve walked directly to where Richard stood with his family and positioned himself close enough that his physical presence alone conveyed the seriousness of the moment. He spoke with controlled intensity, his voice quiet enough that the audience had to strain to hear, but carrying an unmistakable edge of barely restrained anger. He told Richard that what he had just said was not only inappropriate and offensive, but revealed a fundamental failure of character and basic human decency. He explained that Maria and Carlos Rodriguez worked jobs that required physical labor, irregular hours, and constant attention to detail in order to provide for their family and maintain the clean environments that people like Richard took for granted every single day. Steve continued by pointing out that without janitors, Richard's office building would become unusable within days. Without cleaning crews, the restaurants Richard frequented would fail health inspections and close. Without the people Richard had just dismissed as making no contribution to society, the entire infrastructure of modern professional life would collapse into chaos and filth. He told Richard that the Rodriguez family's work had more genuine dignity than Richard's manipulation of financial instruments, because at least the Rodriguez family left the world cleaner and better than they found it rather than extracting wealth through abstract transactions that produced nothing tangible. The audience erupted in applause at Steve's defense of the Rodriguez family, but Steve raised his hand to quiet them because he was not finished addressing Richard. He asked Richard if he had ever actually cleaned anything in his life, if he had ever scrubbed a floor on his hands and knees, or cleaned a toilet, or washed windows on a building's exterior while harnessed to safety equipment. Richard, clearly taken aback by Steve's intensity, stammered that he had hired people to handle such tasks because his time was more valuable spent on professional work. Steve's response was swift and cutting. He told Richard that his answer perfectly illustrated the problem with his worldview, the assumption that some people's time was inherently more valuable than others based solely on the nature of their work rather than on their character, their commitment, or their contribution to their communities. Steve then made a decision that stunned everyone present. He announced that the Hammond family was being removed from the competition immediately and that they needed to leave the stage and exit the studio. He explained that Family Feud was a show that celebrated families and brought people together, and there was no place on that stage for someone who used the platform to demean and disrespect other human beings based on their occupation or economic status. He made absolutely clear that this decision was final and non-negotiable, and that Richard's wealth and social connections would not change the outcome or intimidate the production staff into reversing course. Richard's response demonstrated that he had learned nothing from the confrontation. He became indignant and aggressive, insisting that Steve was overreacting to a simple observation about economic reality. He argued that stating factual differences between professional careers and manual labor was not disrespectful but merely honest. He demanded to speak with the show's producers and threatened legal action for breach of contract and reputational damage. He made it clear that he considered himself above consequences and that he expected his social position to shield him from accountability for his behavior. Steve's patience, already strained to its absolute limit, finally broke completely. He told Richard in no uncertain terms that there would be no conversation with producers, no negotiation, and no opportunity for Richard to manipulate the situation through threats or connections. He explained that Richard's comments had not been observations about economic reality, but rather expressions of contempt for people who performed honest work. He pointed out that Richard's inability to recognize the difference between factual statements and value judgments based on prejudice was precisely why he needed to leave immediately before he caused additional harm. The audience, which had initially responded with shocked silence to Richard's original comments, now became vocally supportive of Steve's decision. People stood and applauded, many shouting their approval of Richard's removal and their support for the Rodriguez family. Some audience members were visibly emotional, clearly connecting Richard's comments to their own experiences of being dismissed or demeaned because of their occupation. The collective energy in the studio had transformed into something powerful and unified, a complete rejection of the elitist contempt that Richard represented. Richard's family members reacted with varying degrees of support for his removal. His wife Patricia seemed embarrassed and quietly urged him to leave without further confrontation. His children appeared relieved that their father's behavior was finally facing consequences, and one of his daughters actually apologized to the Rodriguez family as they prepared to exit the stage. She explained that her father had always held these attitudes, but that the family had hoped participating in a show that celebrated all types of families might help him develop more appreciation for people from different backgrounds. Instead, the experience had simply revealed his prejudices to a national audience. Once the Hammond family had been escorted from the studio by security personnel, Steve turned his full attention to the Rodriguez family. He approached Maria, who was crying quietly, and spoke to her with profound gentleness and respect. He told her that she and her family represented the absolute best of what America should be, people who worked hard at necessary jobs, who raised their children with strong values, and who maintained their dignity in the face of disrespect from people who should have known better. He assured her that Richard's comments reflected only on Richard's character and had no bearing whatsoever on the value or importance of the work she performed. Steve then addressed the audience and the cameras directly, speaking about the importance of respecting all honest work and recognizing that a person's worth was not determined by their job title or income level. He spoke about his own background growing up in a working-class family, about watching his parents work multiple jobs to provide for their children, and about learning early in life that hard work deserved respect regardless of whether it was performed in a boardroom or a cleaning closet. He explained that he had worked various jobs before finding success in entertainment, including positions that some might consider menial, and that those experiences had taught him the dignity of labor and the importance of treating all people with basic respect. The decision was made to continue the episode with only the Rodriguez family, essentially converting it into a showcase rather than a competition. The family would play against the board, attempting to provide answers that appeared in the surveys, with cumulative points determining their prize money rather than competing against another family. This format allowed the show to proceed while honoring the Rodriguez family's preparation and their journey to the studio. The audience remained enthusiastic and supportive, cheering loudly for every answer the Rodriguez family provided and celebrating their successes, as though everyone in the studio was part of one extended family united in support. As the Rodriguez family played through the remaining rounds, something beautiful emerged from what had been such an ugly confrontation. Maria's mother, who had been relatively quiet throughout the earlier part of the episode, stepped forward during one round and provided an answer with such confidence and charm that the entire studio fell in love with her. Her grandchildren supported her encouragingly, creating moments of genuine warmth and family connection that stood in stark contrast to the Hammond family's dynamic. Carlos, recovering from the initial shock of Richard's insult, demonstrated quick wit and strategic thinking in his answers. The Rodriguez children showed the strong family bonds and mutual respect that their parents had clearly instilled in them. The family ultimately accumulated enough points to win a substantial prize, and when the final total was revealed, the audience's celebration was genuinely joyful and completely sincere. Steve announced that he was personally adding an additional contribution to their winnings, because he wanted to honor families like theirs who maintained their values and dignity regardless of external circumstances. He explained that the additional money came from his own pocket and was his way of demonstrating that some people actually practiced the respect they preached rather than merely talking about values they did not actually hold. When the episode aired 2 months later, the network preceded it with a content warning explaining that viewers would witness a family being removed from the competition due to discriminatory comments. They wanted to prepare audiences for content that diverged from the show's typical lighthearted tone, while also making clear that the network supported Steve's decision and the values it represented. The response to the episode was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Social media platforms were flooded with praise for Steve's defense of the Rodriguez family and his willingness to sacrifice smooth production in favor of standing up for basic human dignity. Countless viewers shared their own stories of experiencing class-based discrimination, of being treated as less valuable because they performed manual labor or service work, and of feeling invisible to people who considered themselves socially superior. The episode resonated particularly strongly with essential workers who had been celebrated as heroes during the recent pandemic, but who often felt that respect had been superficial and temporary rather than representing genuine societal change in how their work was valued. The Rodriguez family's experience and Steve's response to Richard's contempt gave voice to feelings that many people had carried privately for years. The incident also sparked serious conversations about class prejudice in American society and the ways that economic inequality had created social divisions that undermined basic respect between people. Sociologists and cultural commentators analyzed the episode as a window into persistent attitudes about work, worth, and social hierarchy. They discussed how Richard's comments, while unusually explicit, reflected assumptions that many people held implicitly about the relative value of different types of work and different types of workers. Richard Hammond himself attempted to manage the fallout from his appearance on the show, though his efforts at damage control largely failed. He gave interviews claiming that his comments had been misunderstood and taken out of context, that he respected all workers, and had simply expressed himself poorly under the pressure of television filming. However, these explanations convinced few people who had heard his original remarks and witnessed his defensive reaction when confronted. His investment firm faced significant backlash, with some clients withdrawing their accounts and many potential clients choosing to work with competitors who had not been associated with such public displays of class prejudice. The Rodriguez family became unexpected advocates for the dignity of working-class labor. They were invited to speak at various events, sharing their experiences and discussing the importance of respecting all honest work regardless of social status or income level. Maria spoke eloquently about the skills required for professional cleaning work, the attention to detail necessary to maintain safe and healthy environments, and the pride she took in her team's work even though it often went unnoticed by the people who benefited from it. Her advocacy helped shine light on the essential nature of work that society often treated as invisible or unimportant. Steve Harvey continued to reference the episode in subsequent interviews and public appearances. He explained that removing the Hammond family had been one of the easiest decisions of his career because the alternative, allowing Richard's comments to stand unchallenged, would have made the show complicit in perpetuating harmful class prejudices. He acknowledged that some people had criticized him for being too harsh or for denying the Hammond family due process, but he stood firmly by his decision. He pointed out that Family Feud was not a courtroom, and that protecting the dignity of guests who had been attacked took priority over providing equal time to someone who had demonstrated such fundamental disrespect. The incident led to changes in how Family Feud screened and prepared contestants. The production team enhanced their interview process to better identify candidates who might hold strongly prejudiced views that could create hostile situations during filming. They implemented more explicit orientation sessions that clearly communicated expectations for respectful behavior and the potential consequences for violations. They also developed protocols for supporting contestants who experienced discrimination or disrespect during episodes, ensuring that families like the Rodriguez family would receive appropriate care and advocacy if similar situations arose in the future. Several years after the episode aired, the story of Steve Harvey kicking out the man who mocked a janitor family had become part of popular culture. People referenced it when discussing the importance of respecting service workers, when confronting class-based prejudice in their own environments, and when teaching children about the dignity of all honest work. The phrase, "pulling a Richard Hammond," became shorthand for displaying contempt toward people based on their occupation or economic status, while getting Steve Harveyed referred to facing consequences for such behavior. The Rodriguez family's life changed in various positive ways following their appearance on the show. The prize money they had won allowed them to achieve some long-deferred goals, including helping their children with education expenses and making a down payment on a modest home they could own rather than rent. However, Maria emphasized in interviews that the most valuable outcome had not been the money, but rather the validation they had received. Having someone as prominent and respected as Steve Harvey defend their dignity and explicitly honor their work had meant more than any financial reward could provide. The episode also inspired action beyond individual families. Several organizations that advocated for the rights and dignity of service workers reported increased donations and volunteer participation following the episode's airing. Labor unions representing janitors, housekeeping staff, and other service workers used clips from the episode in their organizing and education efforts, demonstrating the real-world impact of respect and disrespect on workers' lives. Some employers implemented new training programs focused on ensuring that all employees, regardless of their position or job function, were treated with consistent respect and appreciation. If this story has highlighted the importance of respecting honest work and treating all people with dignity regardless of their occupation, please support our channel by liking this video and subscribing for future content. Share this narrative with others who might benefit from reflecting on their own attitudes towards service workers and considering how they can demonstrate greater appreciation for the labor that makes their lives more comfortable and convenient. In a society that often measures worth through income and status, let us remember that character, integrity, and the willingness to work hard are values that transcend job titles and pay grades. Steve Harvey's willingness to defend those values, even at the cost of disrupting his show's production, remains a powerful reminder that some principles are worth the discomfort of confrontation and the risk of controversy.